Okay, thank you. Tell her, can you just tell her that I'm recording it? And she can watch it when she has a chance. Yeah. Okay, I'll send her a note too at some point. Okay. So we were just talking about what has happened in the book so far. So I haven't put the, hi Fariba. I haven't put the photograph in and picked the words yet, but there will be a vocab quiz for you to do tonight. Okay, for homework for tomorrow, okay, rather than in class time. So do look for that when at the end of the class, I'll put a picture in. Haven't decided what yet. Should it come from New Zealand? Should it be a New Zealand picture for you? Yeah, Ben wants a New Zealand picture. Okay, I'll come up with a good New Zealand picture. All righty. So does anybody know exactly what chapter you guys left off on? So you guys can grab your books if you haven't got a book up here or wherever your books are. What chapter? 26? Okay, 26. All righty. I did put in that there will be a quiz 4 for this. I just didn't know what chapters yet, so I will create that at some point. Does anybody have any questions on what has happened in the story so far? Oh, hi, Mohammed. Anybody unclear on anything? No? Okay. All righty. Well, if you have some, you can always let me know. So, Jeffrey, you don't need to be on your computer at the moment. All righty. Okay, chapter 26. All right, so this is literally, as Lucy said, this is literally right after Tariq tells Layla that he loves her, right? And that he is going to leave. And she can't go. She will not leave Papa. Hi, Layla. Alrighty. So if you guys are ready online, we're in chapter 26. Chapter 26. Did anybody miss class last week? Looks like you guys are all here. Were you all here on Thursday? We didn't fill in Thursday. Was everybody here Thursday? Yeah. Okay. All right. So today is 12/4. Sean, see, Ben, you see, it's online. Okay. All right. So we do need to note that Tariq and Layla did make love to each other, right? You got that in the last chapter. Yeah, the frenzy of legs and then putting on their clothes. Yeah. Okay, so because that's pretty important. Okay. All righty. 26. It was by far the hottest day of the year. The mountains trapped the bone-scorching heat, stifled the city like smoke. Power had been out for days. All over Kabul, electric fans sat idle, almost mockingly so. Layla was lying still on the living room couch, sweating through her blouse. Every exhaled breath burned the tip of her nose. She was aware of her parents talking in Mammy's room. 2 nights ago, and again last night, she had awakened and thought she heard their voices downstairs. They were talking every day now, ever since the bullet, ever since the new hole in the gate. Outside, the far-off boom of artillery, then more closely, the stammering of a long string of gunfire, followed by another. Inside Layla, too, a battle was being waged. Guilt on one side, partnered with shame, and on the other, the conviction that she and Tariq had done, what she and Tariq had done was not sinful, that it had been natural, good, beautiful, even inevitable, spurred by the knowledge that they might never see each other again. Layla rolled to her side on the couch now and tried to remember something. At one point, when they were on the floor, Tariq had lowered his forehead on hers. Then he had panted something, either, "Am I hurting you?" or "Is this hurting you?" Layla couldn't decide which he had said. "Am I hurting you? Is this hurting you?" Only 2 weeks since he had left, and it was already happening. Time blunting the edges of those sharp memories Layla bore down mentally. What had he said? It seemed vital, suddenly, that she know. Layla closed her eyes, concentrated. With the passing of time, she would slowly tire of this exercise. She would find it increasingly exhausting to conjure up, to dust off, to resuscitate once again what was long dead. There would come a day, in fact, years later, when Layla would no longer bewail his loss, or not as relentlessly, not nearly. There would come a day when the details of his face would begin to slip from memory's grip, when overhearing a mother on the street call after her child by Tariq's name would no longer cut her adrift. She would not miss him as she did now, when the ache of his absence was her unremitting companion, like the phantom pain of an amputee. Except every once in a while, when Layla was a grown woman, ironing a shirt or pushing her children on a swing set, something trivial, maybe the warmth of the carpet beneath her feet on a hot day, or the curve of a stranger's forehead, would set off a memory of that afternoon together, and it would all come rushing back. The spontaneity of it, their astonishing imprudence, their clumsiness, the pain of the act, the pleasure of it, the sadness of it, the heat of their entangled bodies. It would flood her, steal her breath. But then it would pass. The moment would pass, leave her deflated, feeling but a vague restlessness. She decided that what he had said was, "Am I hurting you?" Yes, that was it. Layla was happy that she'd remembered. Then Bobby was in the hallway, calling her name from the top of the stairs, asking her to come up quickly. "She's agreed," he said, his voice tremulous with suppressed excitement. "We're leaving, Layla. All three of us. We're leaving Kabul." In Mammy's room, the three of them sat on the bed. Outside, rockets were zipping across the sky as Hekmatir's and Masood's forces fought and fought. Layla knew that somewhere in the city, someone had just died, and that a pall of black smoke was hovering over some building that had collapsed in a puffing mass of dust. There would be bodies to step around in the morning. Some would be collected, others not. Then Kabul's dogs, who had developed a taste for human meat, would feast. All the time, Layla had an urge to run through those streets. She could barely contain her own happiness and took effort to sit, to not shriek with joy. Bobby said they would go to Pakistan first to apply for visas. Pakistan, where Tariq was. Tariq was only gone 17 days, Layla calculated excitedly. If only Mammy had made up her mind 17 days earlier, they could have left together. She would have been with Tariq right now, but that didn't matter now. They were going to Peshawar, she, Mammy, and Bobby, and they would find Tariq and his parents there. Surely they would. Who knew? They would process their paperwork together. Then, who knew? Who knew? Europe? America? Maybe, as Bobby was always saying, somewhere near the sea. Mammy was half lying, half sitting against the headboard. Her eyes were puffy. She was picking at her hair. 3 days before, Layla had gone outside for a breath of air. She had stood by the front gates, leaning against them, when she'd heard a loud crack and something that zipped by her right ear, sending tiny splinters of wood flying before her eyes. After Gidi's death and the thousands of rounds fired and myriad rockets that had fallen on Kabul, it was the sight of that single round hole in the gate, less than 3 fingers away from where Layla's head had been, that shook Mammy awake. Made her see that one war had cost her 2 children already. This latest could cost her the remaining one. From the walls of the room, Ahmed and Noor smiled down. Layla watched Mammy's eyes bouncing now, guiltily from one photo to the other, as if looking for their consent, their blessing, as if asking for forgiveness. "There's nothing left for us here," Bobby said. "Our sons are gone, but we still have Layla. We still have each other, Fariba. We can make a new life." Bobby reached across the bed. When he leaned to take her hands, Mammy let him. On her face, a look of concession, of resignation. They held each other's hands lightly, and then they were swaying gently in an embrace. Mammy buried her face in his neck. She grabbed a handful of his shirt. For hours that night, the excitement robbed Layla of sleep. She lay in bed and watched the horizon light up in garish shades of orange and yellow. At some point, though, despite the exhilaration inside and the crack of artillery fire outside, she fell asleep and dreamed. They are on a ribbon of beach, sitting on a quilt. It's a chilly, overcast day, but it's warm next to Tariq under the blanket draped over their shoulders. She can see cars parked behind a low fence of chipped white paint beneath a row of windswept palm trees. The wind makes her eyes water and buries their shoes in sand, hurls knots of dead grass from the curved ridges of one dune to another. They're watching sailboats bob in the distance. Around them, seagulls squawk and shiver in the wind. The wind whips up another spray of sand off the shallow windward slopes. There is a noise, then a chant, and she tells him something Bobby had taught her years before about singing sand. He rubs at her eyebrow, wipes grains of sand from it. She catches a flicker of the band on his finger. It's identical to hers, gold with a sort of maze pattern etched all the way around. It's true, she tells him. It's the friction of grain against grain. Listen. He does. He frowns. They wait. They hear it again. A groaning sound. Then the wind is soft when it blows hard, a mewling, high-pitched chorus. Bobby said they should take only what was absolutely necessary. They would sell the rest. That should hold us in Peshawar until I find work. For the next 2 days, they gathered items to be sold. They put them in big piles. In her room, Layla set aside old blouses, old shoes, books, toys. Looking under her bed, she found a tiny yellow glass cow Hasina had passed to her during recess in 5th grade. A miniature soccer ball keychain, a gift from Geety. A little wooden zebra on wheels, a ceramic astronaut she and Tariq had found one day in a gutter. She'd been 6 and he 8. They'd had a minor row, Layla remembered, over which one of them had found it. Mammy, too, gathered her things. There was a reluctance in her movements, and her eyes had a lethargic, faraway look in them. She did away with her good plates, her napkins, all her jewelry, save for her wedding band and most of her old clothes. You're not selling this, are you? Layla said, lifting Mammy's wedding dress. It cascaded open onto her lap. She touched the lace and the ribbon along the neckline, the hand-sewn seed pearls on the sleeves. Mammy shrugged and took it from her. She tossed it brusquely on a pile of clothes, like ripping off a Band-Aid in one stroke, Layla thought. It was Bobby who had the most painful task. Layla found him standing in his study, a ruleful expression on his face as he surveyed his shelves. He was wearing a secondhand t-shirt with a picture of San Francisco's Red Bridge on it. What's San Francisco's Red Bridge? The Golden Gate Bridge, and it's red, which I don't know why they call it the Golden Gate when it's red. A thick fog rose from the white-capped waters and engulfed the bridge's towers. You know the old bit, he said. You're on a deserted island. You can have 5 books. Which do you choose? I never thought I'd actually have to. I'll have to start you a new collection, Bobby. He smiled sadly. I can't believe I'm leaving Kabul. I went to school here, got my first job here, became a father in this town. It's strange to think that I'll be sleeping beneath another city's skies soon. It's strange for me, too. All day, this poem about Kabul has been bouncing around in my head. Saib-e Tabrizi wrote it back in the 17th century, I think. I used to know the whole poem, but all I can remember now is 2 lines. One could not count the moons that shimmer on her roofs, or the 1,000 splendid suns that hide behind her walls. All right, do we know where he got his title now? Yeah, I have a copy of the whole poem. I'll share that with you. Layla looked up, saw he was weeping. She put an arm around his waist. Oh, Bobby, we'll come back. When the war is over, we'll come back to Kabul. Inshallah, you'll see. On the 3rd morning, Layla began moving the piles of things to the yard and depositing them by the front door. They would fetch a taxi then and take it all to a pawn shop. You guys know what a pawn shop is? Yeah, where you sell. So a pawn shop is literally a store, but where you can sell your items to them and then for other people to buy. So it's like a secondhand store, but they wait a period of time before they sell your item in case you want to buy it back yourself. So they give you money and then you can either let it go, or if you get money and you want your ring back or your, hair clip back or whatever, then you can buy it back. That's what a pawn shop is. Layla kept shuffling between the house and the yard, back and forth, carrying stacks of clothes and dishes and box after box of Bobby's books. She should have been exhausted by noon when the mound of belongings by the front door had grown waist high, But with each trip, she knew that she was that much closer to seeing Tariq again. And with each trip, her legs became more sprightly, her arms more tireless. We're going to need a big taxi. Layla looked up. It was Mammy calling down from her bedroom upstairs. She was leaning out the window, resting her elbows on the sill. The sun, bright and warm, caught in her graying hair, shone on her drawn, thin face. Mammy was wearing the same cobalt blue dress she had worn the day of the lunch party 4 months earlier. A youthful dress meant for a young woman, but for a moment, Mammy looked to Layla like an old woman with stringy arms and sunken temples and slow eyes, rimmed by darkened circles of weariness, an altogether different creature from the plump, round-faced woman beaming radiantly from those grainy wedding photos. 2 big taxis, Layla said. She could see Bobby, too, in the living room, stacking boxes of books atop each other. Come up when you're done with those, Mammy said. We'll sit down for lunch. Boiled eggs and leftover beans. My favorite, Layla said. She thought suddenly of her dream. She and Tariq on a quilt, the ocean, the wind, the dunes. What it had sounded like, she wondered, the singing sands. Layla stopped. She saw a gray lizard crawl out of the crack of the ground. Its head shot to the side. It blinked, darted under a rock. Layla pictured the beach again, except now the singing was all around and growing, louder and louder by the moment, higher and higher. It flooded her ears, drowned everything else out. The gulls were feathered mimes now, opening and closing their beaks noiselessly, and the waves were crashing with foam and spray, but no roar. The sands sang on, screaming now, a sound like a tinkling? No, not a tinkling. No, a whistling. Layla dropped the books at her feet. She looked up to the sky, shielded her eyes with one hand, then a giant roar. Behind her, a flash of white. The ground lurched beneath her feet. Something hot and powerful slammed into her from behind. It knocked her out of her sandals, lifted her up, and now she was flying, twisting, and rotating in the air, seeing sky, then earth, and sky, then earth. A big churning chunk of wood whipped by. So did 1,000 shards of glass, and it seemed to Layla that she could see each individual one flying all around her, flipping slowly end over end, the sunlight catching in each, tiny, beautiful rainbows. Then Layla struck the wall, crashed to the ground, on her face and arms a shower of dirt and pebbles and glass. The last thing she was aware of was seeing something thud to the ground nearby, a bloody chunk of something. On it, the tip of a red bridge poking through the thick fog. Shapes moving about, a fluorescent light shines from the ceiling above. A woman's face appears, hovers over hers. Layla fades back to the dark. Another face, this time a man's. His feature seems broad and droopy. His lips move but make no sound. All Layla hears is ringing. The man waves his hand at her, frowns, his lips move again. It hurts. It hurts to breathe. It hurts everywhere. A glass of water, a pink pill, back to the darkness. The woman again, long face, narrow set eyes. She says something. Layla can't hear anything but the ringing. She can see the words like black, thick syrup spilling out of the woman's mouth. Who has a long face with narrow set eyes?
What?
Miriam.
Oh,
Miriam, the long face and narrow set eyes. Her chest hurts, her arms and legs hurt, all around shapes moving. Where's Tariq? Why isn't he here? Darkness, a flock of stars. Bobby and she, perched somewhere high up. He is pointing to a field of barley. A generator comes to life. The long-faced woman is standing over her, looking down. It hurts to breathe. Somewhere, an accordion playing. Mercifully, the pink pill again, then a deep hush. A deep hush falls over everything. Ooh. Things change pretty quickly, don't they?
should I continue?
Ah, yeah, we got to continue, right? You got to know what happens now, don't you? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can't leave us hanging. Yeah. Yeah, not so good. Yeah, Bobby died. Okay, so now we are in part 3, right? So this is part 3. So remember how in part 1, what was part 1 about? Miriam and her life and getting married to Rashid and losing her mother, right? And moving to Kabul. And then part 2 was all about Layla growing up, right? And now part 3 is where we put them together. Okay, and so we're getting a hint of it right at the end of part 2 with the long face, right? Miriam, and then even how about another face, this time a man's, his features seem broad and droopy. Who is that? Rashid, right? Okay, and remember they live down the street, right? So, so what you're going to see in part 3 is the combination, but you're also going to notice that the chapters have a name. Okay, so they're going to kind of go back and forth between Miriam and Layla and their perspectives. Okay, so make note of the fact of, you know, the name that we're reading about. Okay, everybody online doing okay with me as much as possible?
Yes, teacher.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
fine. That's great.
Okay, good. All right. So 27, Miriam. Do you know who I am? The girl's eyes fluttered. Do you know what has happened? The girl's mouth quivered. She closed her eyes, swallowed. Her hand grazed her left cheek. She mouthed something. Miriam leaned in closer. This ear, the girl breathed, I can't hear. For the first week, the girl did little but sleep, with help from the pink pills Rashid paid for at the hospital. She murmured in her sleep. Sometimes she spoke gibberish, cried out, called out names Miriam did not recognize. She wept in her sleep, grew agitated, kicked the blankets off, and then Miriam had to hold her down. Sometimes she retched and retched, threw up everything Miriam fed her. When she wasn't agitated, the girl was a sullen pair of eyes staring from under the blanket, breathing out short little answers to Miriam and Rashid's questions. Some days she was childlike, whipped her head side to side when Miriam, then Rashid, tried to feed her. She went rigid when Miriam came at her with a spoon. But she tired easily and submitted eventually to their persistent badgering. Long bouts of weeping followed surrender. Rashid and Miriam rubbed antibiotic ointments on the cuts on the girl's face and neck and on the sutured gashes on her shoulder. Sutured, do you know what sutured means? That means stitches to pull it together. So they would have taken her to the hospital and they would have stitched her up. Sutured gashes on her shoulder, across her forearms and lower legs. Miriam dressed them with bandages, which she washed and recycled. She held the girl's hair back out of her face when she had to retch. How long is she staying? She asked Rashid. Until she's better. Look at her. She's in no shape to go, poor thing. It was Rashid who found the girl, who dug her out from beneath the rubble. Lucky I was home, he said to the girl. He was sitting on a folding chair beside Miriam's bed, where the girl lay. Lucky for you, I mean. I dug you out with my own hands. There was a scrap of metal this big. Here, he spread his thumb and index finger apart to show her, at least doubling in Miriam's estimation, the actual size of it. This big, sticking right out of your shoulder. It was really embedded in there. I thought I'd have to use a pair of pliers, but you're all right. In no time, you'll be no socha, good as new. It was Rashid who salvaged a handful of Hakim's books. Most of them were ash, the rest were looted, I'm afraid. He helped Miriam watch over the girl that first week. One day, he came home from work with a new blanket and pillow. Another day, a bottle of pills. Vitamins, he said. It was Rashid who gave Layla the news that her friend Tariq's house was occupied now. A gift, he said, from one of Saif's commanders to 3 of his men. A gift. Ha! The 3 men were actually boys with suntanned, youthful faces. Miriam could see them when she passed by, always dressed in their fatigues, squatting by the front door of Tariq's house, playing cards and smoking, their Kalashnikovs leaning against the wall. You guys know what a Kalashnikov is? That is a Soviet rifle. So they're guns. The brawny one, the one with the self-satisfied, scornful demeanor, was the leader. The youngest was also the quietest, the one who seemed reluctant to wholeheartedly embrace his friend's air of impunity. He had taken to smiling and tipping his head salam when Miriam passed by. When he did, some of his surface smugness dropped away, and Miriam caught a glint of humility as yet uncorrupted. Then one morning, rockets slammed into the house. They were rumored later to have been fired by the Hazaras of Wadat. For some time, neighbors kept finding bits and pieces of the boys. They had it coming, said Rashid. The girl was extraordinarily lucky, Miriam thought, to escape with relatively minor injuries, considering the rocket had turned her house into smoking rubble. And so slowly the girl got better. She began to eat more, began to brush her own hair. She took baths on her own. She began taking her meals downstairs with Miriam and Rashid. But then some memory would arise, unbidden, and there would be stony silences or spells of churlishness, withdrawals and collapses, wan looks, nightmares, and sudden attacks of grief, retching, and sometimes regrets. I shouldn't even be here, she said one day. Miriam was changing the sheets. The girl watched from the floor, her bruised knees drawn up against her chest. My father wanted to take out the boxes, the books. He said they were too heavy for me, but I wouldn't let him. I was so eager. I should have been the one inside the house when it happened. Miriam snapped the clean sheet and let it settle on the bed. She looked at the girl, at her blonde curls, her slender neck and green eyes, her high cheekbones and plump lips. Miriam remembered seeing her on the streets when she was little, tottering after her mother on the way to the tandoor, riding on the shoulders of her brother, the younger one, with a patch of hair on his ear, shooting marbles with the carpenter's boy. The girl was looking back as if waiting for Miriam to pass on some morsel of wisdom, to say something encouraging. But what wisdom did Miriam have to offer? What encouragement? Miriam remembered the day they buried Nana and how little comfort she had found when Mullah Faizullah had quoted the Quran for her. Blessed is he in whose hands is the kingdom, and he who has power over all things, who created death and life that he may try you. Or when he'd said of her own guilt, these thoughts are no good, Miriam Joe. They will destroy you. It isn't your fault. It wasn't your fault. What could she say to this girl that would ease her burden? As it turned out, Miriam didn't have anything to say, or say anything, because the girl's face twisted and she was on fours, then saying she was going to be sick. Wait, hold on, I'll get a pan. Not on the floor, I just cleaned. Oh, Kodaya God. Then one day, about a month after the blast that killed the girl's parents, a man came knocking. Miriam opened the door. He stated his business. There is a man here to see you, Miriam said. The girl raised her head from the pillow. He says his name is Abdul Sharif. I don't know any Abdul Sharif. Well, he's here asking for you. You need to come down and talk to him. Okay, so she lost both her parents, right? We get that, yeah? Layla sat across from Abdul Sharif, who was a thin, small-headed man with a bulbous nose, pocked with the same cratered scars that pitted his cheeks. His hair, short and brown, stood on his scalp like needles in a pincushion. You'll have to forgive me, Hamshira, he said, adjusting his loose collar and dabbing at his brow with a handkerchief. I still haven't quite recovered, I fear. 5 more days of these, what are they called? Sulfa pills. Layla positioned herself in her seat so that her right ear, the good one, was closest to him. Were you a friend of my parents? No, Abdul Sharif said quickly. Forgive me. He raised a finger, took a long sip of the water that Miriam had placed in front of him. I should begin at the beginning, I suppose. He dabbed at his lips, again at his brow. I'm a businessman. I own clothing stores, mostly men's clothing. Chapans, hats, tumbans, suits, ties, you name it. 2 stores here in Kabul, in Taimani and Sharanau, though I just sold those, and 2 in Pakistan and Peshawar. That's where my warehouse is as well. So I travel a lot back and forth, which these days, he shook his head and chuckled tiredly, is, let's just say that it's an adventure. I was in Peshawar recently on business, taking orders, going over inventory, that sort of thing. Also to visit my family. We have 3 daughters, Alamadullah. I had moved them and my wife to Peshawar after the Mujahideen began going at each other's throats. I won't have their names added to the Shaheed list, nor mine, to be honest. I'll be joining them very soon in Salah. Anyway, I was supposed to be back in Kabul the Wednesday before last, but as luck would have it, I came down with an illness. I won't bother you with it, Hamshira. Suffice it to say that when I went to do my private business, the simpler of the 2, it felt like passing chunks of broken glass. I wouldn't wish it on Hekmatyar himself. My wife, Nadia Yan, Allah bless her, she begged me to see a doctor. But I thought I'd beat it with aspirin and a lot of water. Nadia Yan insisted, and I said no. Back and forth we went. You know the saying, a stubborn ass needs a stubborn driver. This time, I'm afraid, the ass won. That would be me. He drank the rest of his water and extended the glass to Miriam. If it's not too much, Damat. Miriam took the glass and went to fill it. Needless to say, I should have listened to her. She'd always been the more sensible one. God give her a long life. By the time I made it to the hospital, I was burning with fever and shaking like a bead tree in the wind. I could barely stand. The doctor said I had blood poisoning. She said 2 or 3 more days and I would have made my wife a widow. They put me in a special unit, reserved for really sick people, I suppose. Oh, Tashakor. He took the glass from Miriam and from his coat pocket produced a large white pill. The size of these things. Layla watched him swallow his pill. She was aware that her breathing had quickened. Her legs felt heavy as though weights had been tethered to them. She told herself that he wasn't done, that he hadn't told her anything as yet, but he would go on in a second, and she resisted the urge to get up and leave before he told her things she didn't want to hear. Abdul Sharif set his glass on the table. That's where I met your friend, Mohammed Tariq Walizai. Layla's heart sped up. Tariq in a hospital? A special unit? For really sick people? She swallowed dry spit, shifted on her chair. She had to steel herself. If she didn't, she feared she would come unhinged. She diverted her thoughts from hospitals and special units and thought instead about the fact that she hadn't heard Tariq called by his full name since the two of them had enrolled in the Farsi winter course years back. The teacher would call roll after the bell and say his name like that, Mohammed Tariq Walizai. It had struck her as a comically officious then, hearing his full name uttered. What happened to him, I heard from one of the nurses, Abdul Sharif resumed, tapping his chest with a fist as if to ease the passage of the pill. With all the time I've spent in Peshawar, I've become pretty proficient in Urdu. Anyway, what I gathered was that your friend was in a lorry, which is a truck, by the way, full of refugees, 23 of them, all headed for Peshawar. Near the border, they were caught in crossfire. A rocket hit the lorry. Probably a stray, but you never know with these people. You never know. There were only 6 survivors, all of them admitted to the same unit. 3 died within 24 hours. 2 of them lived as sisters, as I understood it, and had been discharged. Your friend, Mr. Walizai, was the last. He'd been there for almost 3 weeks by the time I arrived. So he was alive, but how badly had they hurt him? Layla wondered frantically. How badly? Badly enough to be put in a special unit. Evidently, Layla was aware that she had started sweating, that her face felt hot. She tried to think of something else, something pleasant, like the trip to Bamiyan to see the Buddhas with Tariq and Bobby. But instead, an image of Tariq's parents presented itself. Tariq's mother trapped in the lorry upside down, screaming for Tariq through the smoke. Arms and chest on fire, the wig melting into her scalp. Layla had to take a series of rapid breaths. He was in the bed next to mine. There were no walls, only a curtain between us, so I could see him pretty well. Abdul Sharif found a sudden need to toy with his wedding band. Your friend, he was badly, very badly injured. You understand? He had rubber tubes coming out of him everywhere. At first, I thought he'd lost both legs in the attack. But a nurse said no, only the right. The left one was on account of an old injury. There were internal injuries too. He'd operated 3 times already, took out sections of his intestines. I don't remember what else, and he was burned quite badly. That's all I'll say about it. I'm sure you have your fair share of nightmares, Hamshira. No sense to me in me adding to them. Tariq was legless now. He was a torso with 2 stumps. Legless. Layla thought she might collapse. With deliberate, desperate effort, she sent the tendrils of her mind out of this room, out the window, away from this man, over the street outside, over the city now, and its flat-topped houses and bazaars, its maze of narrow streets turned to sand castles. He was drugged up most of the time, for the pain, you understand, but he had moments when the drugs were wearing off, when he was clear, in pain but clear of mind. I would talk to him from my bed. I told him who I was, where I was from. He was glad, I think, that there was a Hamwatan next to him. I did most of the talking. It was hard for him to. His voice was hoarse, and I think it hurt him to move his lips. So I told him about my daughters and about our house in Peshawar and the veranda of my brother-in-law that I are building out in the back. I told him I had sold the stores in Kabul and that I was going back to finish up the paperwork. It wasn't much, but it occupied him. At least I like to think it did. Sometimes he talked too. Half the time I couldn't make out what he was saying, but I caught enough. Described where he'd lived. He talked about his uncle in Gonzny and his mother's cooking and his father's carpentry, him playing the accordion. But mostly he talked about you, Shira. He said you were, how did he put it? His earliest memory. I think that's right, yes. I could tell he cared a great deal about you. Ballet, that much was plain to see. But he said he was glad that you weren't there. He said he didn't want you seeing him like that. Layla's feet felt heavy again, anchored to the floor, as if all her blood had suddenly pooled down there. But her mind was far away, free and fleet, hurtling like a speeding missile beyond Kabul, over craggy brown hills and over deserts, ragged with clumps of sage, past canyons of ragged red rock and over snow-capped mountains. When I told him I was going back to Kabul, he asked me to find you, to tell you that he was thinking of you, that he missed you. I promised him I would. I'd taken quite a liking to him, you see. He was a decent sort of boy, I could tell. Abdul Sharif wiped his brow with his handkerchief. I woke up one night, he went on, his interest in the wedding band renewed. I think it was night anyway. It's hard to tell in those places. There aren't any windows. Sunrise, sundown, you just don't know. But I woke up and there was some sort of commotion around the bed next to mine. You have to understand that I was full of drugs myself, always slipping in and out, to the point where it was hard to tell what was real and what you'd dreamed up. All I remember is doctors huddled around the bed, calling for this and that, alarms bleeping, syringes all over the ground. In the morning, the bed was empty. I asked a nurse, valiantly. He fought valiantly. Sheila was dimly aware that she was nodding. She'd known, of course, she'd known. She'd known the moment she sat across from this man why he was here, what news he was bringing. At first, you see, I didn't think you even existed, he was saying now. I thought it was the morphine talking. Maybe I even hoped you didn't exist. I'd always dreaded bearing bad news. But I promised him, and like I said, I'd become rather fond of him. So I came by here a few days ago. I asked around for you, talked to some neighbors. They pointed to this house. They also told me what had happened to your parents. When I heard about that, well, I turned around and left. I wasn't going to tell you. I decided it would be too much for you, for anybody. Abdul Sharif. Hold on one second. Abdul Sharif reached across the table and put a hand on her kneecap. But I came back because in the end, I think he would have wanted you to know. I believe that. I'm so sorry. I wish Layla wasn't listening anymore. She was remembering the day the man from Panjshir had come to deliver the news of Ahmad and Noor's death. She remembered Bobby, white-faced, slumping on the couch, and Mammy, her hand flying to her mouth when she heard. Layla had watched Mammy come undone that day, and it had scared her, but she hadn't felt any true sorrow. She hadn't understood the awfulness of her mother's loss. Now another stranger bringing news of another death. Now she was the one sitting on the chair. Was this her penalty then? Her punishment for being aloof to her own mother's suffering? Layla remembered how Mammy had dropped to the ground, how she'd screamed, torn at her hair, but Layla couldn't even manage that. She could hardly move. She could hardly move a muscle. She sat on the chair instead, hands limp in her lap, eyes staring at nothing, and let her mind fly on. She let it fly on until it found the place, the good and safe place where the barley fields were green, where the water ran clear and the cottonwood seeds danced by the thousands in the air, where Bobby was reading a book beneath an acacia and Tariq was napping with his hands laced across his chest, and where she could dip her feet in the stream and dream good dreams beneath the watchful gaze of gods of ancient sun-bleached rock. Poor Layla, right? 1, 2, 3, all the people important to her. Okay.
Sorry.
This is.
My tongue like has that. I and I got that from a flower.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. Sometimes we laugh when we're most distressed. Okay. Yeah,
I also just have dark humor.
yeah. Okay.
Bad because one thing like she was thinking about like how he's just a torso.
A torso. Yeah.
I was like, oh, it's really sad. The way that she put it was just like.
Yeah. Yeah. Alrighty, so Zuccarello, we just read that Layla lost her parents when a bomb hit the house, and she survived and has she got dug out of the rubble by Rashid and Miriam, and she's now at Miriam and Rashid's house, and they're taking care of her.
I was surprised Rashid even did that.
What? Who?
Like,
Oh, that Miriam. Well, I could see Miriam doing that more than, I don't know.
like
Rashid doesn't strike me as somebody that's particularly.
Rashid did it first, though.
Yeah, she did.
Miriam was like taking care of her.
Yeah.
She was getting clothes and antibiotics and
Yeah.
doing all that stuff for her.
Yep.
Her even doing anything. I guess there's some humanity in Rashid.
Some humanity in Rashid.
Just a little bit.
hmm
Miriam seems like-
I think we can read chapter 29 before the end, and then I can put a picture in for the vocabulary. All right, 29, Miriam, right? See how we're going back and forth? That one was Layla. This one is Miriam. I'm so sorry, Rashid said to the girl, taking his bowl of mustawa and meatballs from Miriam without looking at her. So there's little hints, by the way, about how Rashid treats Miriam, right? Doesn't even look at her. She's just a servant for him, right? I know you were very close, friends, the two of you, always together since you were kids. It's a terrible thing what's happened. Too many young Afghan men are dying this way. He motioned impatiently with his hand, still looking at the girl, and Miriam passed him a napkin. For years, Miriam had looked on as he ate, the muscles of his temples churning, one hand making compact little rice balls, the back of the other wiping grease, swiping stray grains from the corners of his mouth. For years, he had eaten without looking up, without speaking, his silence condemning, as though some judgment were being passed, then broken only by an accusatory grunt, a disapproving cluck of his tongue, a one-word command for more bread, more water. Now, he ate with a spoon, used a napkin, said Lotfan when asking for water, and talked spiritedly and incessantly. If you ask me, the Americans armed the wrong man in Hekmatyar. All the guns the CIA handed him in the 80s to fight the Soviets. The Soviets are gone, but he still has the guns. And now he's turning them on innocent people like your parents. And he calls this jihad. What a farce. What does jihad have to do with killing women and children? Better the CIA had armed Commander Massoud. You guys know what the CIA is?
Yeah.
Central Intelligence Agency? Yeah. The US government likes to clandestinely hand weapons over to various groups of people. Miriam's eyebrows shot up of her own will. Commander Massoud? In her head, she could hear Rashid's rants against Massoud, how he was a traitor and a communist. But then Massoud was a Tajik, of course, like Layla. Now there is a reasonable fellow, an honorable Afghan, a man genuinely interested in a peaceful resolution. Rashid shrugged and sighed. Not that they'd give a damn in America, mind you. What do they care about that Pashtuns and Hazaras and Tajiks and Uzbeks are killing each other? How many Americans can even tell one from the other? Don't expect help from them, I say. Now that the Soviets have collapsed, we're no use to them. We served our purpose. To them, Afghanistan is a Kanarab, a shithole. Excuse my language, but it's true. What do you think, Layla Yan? The girl mumbled something unintelligible and pushed a meatball around in her bowl. Rashid nodded thoughtfully, as though she'd said the most clever thing he'd ever heard. Miriam had to look away. You know, your father, God give him peace, your father and I used to have discussions like this. This was before you were born, of course. On and on we'd go on about politics, about books too, didn't we, Miriam? You remember. Miriam busied herself, taking a sip of water. Do you think that's true? Anyway, I hope I'm not boring you with all this talk of politics. Later, Miriam was in the kitchen, soaking dishes in soapy water, a tightly wound knot in her belly. It wasn't so much what he said, the blatant lies, the contrived empathy, or even the fact that he had not raised a hand to her, Miriam, since he had dug the girl out of those bricks. It was the staged delivery, like a performance, an attempt on his part, both sly and pathetic, to impress, to charm. And suddenly, Miriam knew that her suspicions were right. She understood with dread that that was like a blinding whack to the side of her head, that what she was witnessing was nothing less than a courtship. Do we know what courtship means? Paula, you good? Courtship means, anybody? What is Rashid doing?
She's trying to like make him seem like he's this good, amazing guy, and I have a feeling it's because I don't know why he's gonna try to replace Miriam or something.
Yeah, he's coming on to Layla, right? He's trying to make himself seem appealing to
He
Layla.
still wants it.
Still wants a kid. Okay, yeah. All righty. So yes, he's courting Layla. He's being super nice and pretending like he's got manners because he likes Layla. Yeah. Now think about the age difference now, right? Because it's been, right, what, like 20 years? Yeah, so he's probably in his 60s. When she'd at last worked up the nerve, Miriam went to his room. Rashid lit a cigarette and said, "Why not?" Miriam knew right then that she was defeated. She'd half expected, half hoped that he would deny everything, feign surprise, maybe even outrage. She might have succeeded in, outrage at what she was implying. She might have had the upper hand then. She might have succeeded in shaming him, but it stole her grit, his calm acknowledgement, this matter-of-fact tone. "Sit down," he said. He was lying on his bed, back to the wall, his thick, long legs splayed on the mattress. "Sit down before you faint and cut your head open." Miriam felt herself drop onto the folding chair beside his bed. "Hand me that ashtray, would you?" he said. Obediently, she did. Rashid had to be 60 or more now, thought Miriam. And in fact, Rashid himself did not know his exact age. His hair had gone white, but it was thick and coarse as ever. There was a sag now to his eyelids and the skin of his neck, which was wrinkled and leathery. His cheeks hung a bit more than they used to. In the mornings, he stooped just a tad. But he still had the stout shoulders, the thick torso, the strong hands, the swollen belly that entered the room before any other part of him did. On the whole, Miriam thought that he had weathered the years considerably better than she. "We need to legitimize this situation," he said, now balancing the ashtray on his belly, his lips scrunched up in a playful pucker. "People will talk. It looks dishonorable. An unmarried young woman living here. It's bad for my reputation, and hers, and yours, I might add." 18 years, Miriam said, "and I never asked you for a thing. Not one thing. I'm asking now." He inhaled smoke and let it out slowly. She can't just stay here, if that's what you're suggesting. I can't go on feeding her and clothing her and giving her a place to sleep. I'm not the Red Cross, Miriam. "But this? What of it? What? She's too young, you think? She's 14. Hardly a child. You were 15, remember? My mother was 14 when she had me, 13 when she married." I don't want this," Miriam said, numb with contempt and helplessness. "It's not your decision. It's hers and mine. I'm too old. She's too young. You're too old. This is nonsense." "I am too old for you to do this to me," Miriam said, balling up fistfuls of her dress so tightly her hands shook. "For you, after all these years, to make me an amba. Don't be so dramatic. It's a common thing and you know it. I have friends who have 2, 3, 4 wives. Your own father had 3. Besides, what I'm doing now, most men I know would have done long ago. You know it's true. I won't allow it." At this, Rashid smiled sadly. "There is another option," he said, scratching the sole of one foot with the calloused heel of the other. "She can leave. I won't stand in her way, but I suspect she won't get far. No food, no water, not a rupiah in her pockets, bullets and rockets flying everywhere. How many days do you suppose she'll last before she is abducted, raped, or tossed into some roadside ditch with her throat slit? Or all 3? He coughed and adjusted the pillow behind his back. "The roads out there are unforgiving, Miriam, believe me. Bloodhounds and bandits at every turn. I wouldn't like her chances, not at all. But let's say that by some miracle she gets to Peshawar. What then? Do you have any idea what those camps are like?" He gazed at her from behind a column of smoke. "People living under scraps of cardboard, TB, dysentery, famine, crime. And that's before winter. Then it's frostbite season, pneumonia, people turning to icicles. Those camps become frozen graveyards. Of course," he made a playful twirling motion with his hand, "she could keep warm in one of those Peshawar brothels. Business is booming there, I hear. A beauty like her ought to bring in a small fortune, don't you think?" He set the ashtray on the nightstand and swung his legs over the side of the bed. Look, he said, sounding more conciliatory now, as a victor could afford to. I knew you wouldn't take this well, and I don't really blame you, but this is for the best. You'll see. Think of it this way, Miriam. I'm giving you help around the house and her a sanctuary, a home and a husband. These days, times being what they are, a woman needs a husband. Haven't you noticed all the widows sleeping on the streets? They would kill for this chance. In fact, this is, well, I'd say this is downright charitable of me. He smiled. The way I see it, I deserve a medal. Later in the dark, Miriam told the girl. For a long time, the girl said nothing. He wants an answer by this morning, Miriam said. He can have it now, the girl said. My answer is yes. Whew. Yeah. So there's that one little passing sentence where Miriam noticed that Rashid hadn't been hitting her, right? So that kind of shows you how often I'm sure that she was a victim of his violence. But he didn't, of course, want Layla to see that. So he had stopped abusing Miriam for a time there. Rashid is nasty. Yeah. He's one of my favorite villains. Just look at Jack and say Rashid, and Jack will go off. Yeah. Okay, so things have changed dramatically since I got back from New Zealand, huh? Layla's parents are dead. Tariq dead. She's marrying Rashid. Good Lord, I should have stayed in New Zealand for poor Layla. All right. Anybody have any questions? Any comments? Anything from my Kabul people? Yes, Rashid is a disgusting, vile man. That is Lucy's take on things. I would agree. Anybody else?
The fact that it's like using the fact, using her vulnerability just to have a kid and have another life.
Yep. Yes.
He's not doing it because he cares. He's doing it because he wants a child and another life.
I think that Rashid is inherently selfish. Yeah, that would be why. What? Sean?
Knows that everybody they have thing like talks about like social, like some problems are social.
Yeah.
Or some problems, some like ideas.
Mm-hmm.
She told readers.
Like, yeah.
Readers, like by thought. Like, what kind of topics?
Yeah, so the kind of the themes that a novel might have that are you can see the social consequences in society even today. Yeah, so what sort of themes are being addressed in this book? We know women's rights, right? We've talked about that, right? Certainly, I would say domestic violence, where Rashid comes in. You could even say, you know, as we look at Rashid, you know, just selfishness. Yeah. Yeah, how about, you know, grief, right? I would definitely say that. How things can change in a second in life, and that's true for all of us, right? Certainly, even more so in a war-torn environment, of which there are sadly many. This morning on the front page of the New York Times was a crater in Gaza, you know, with people standing around looking down at the crater in Gaza, and the Israelis are telling some of the Gazan residents, you know, that you gotta keep moving because we're gonna just bomb the crap out of your country or your territory. So certainly in war-torn environments, Ukraine, Afghanistan, you know, and Gaza right now, things change, you know, within seconds. Yeah.
Do you Rashid see Layla as a daughter or new wife?
New wife.
Oh.
Wouldn't it be nice if he saw her as a daughter? And that's not the case. No, he wants her to be his wife. And she just said yes. So she's going to become his wife. Yeah. And I think too, and maybe we'll get more of a sense of this as we read, I think he's always, even when she was a little girl, thought she was beautiful. right? She is, and she's kind of exceptionally beautiful from what the story is telling us. So I think too that that's kind of a an addition. Like he's now got this girl that he's been seeing for years, who is, you know, different. The blonde hair, blonde curls, and the green eyes, and she's beautiful. And now he's going to make her his, right? Yeah. Okay. Any questions from people online?
Teacher, should we pass test tonight?
Yeah, the vocabulary. Did you guys? I haven't looked to see the vocabulary in your list. Have you guys gotten that completed? I don't know what number it is.
We are done with the vocabulary.
Okay, so yes, I will put in a photograph and I will choose the words. And that would be homework, is the vocabulary quiz. And I think it's every class is on something different. So can't remember what one you guys are on, but I think it is, let me look. You guys are on vocabulary 8, right? And Jeffrey, you don't have words in here. Vocabulary 8. All right, so I will put in a photograph. And Lucy, oh, Lucy left. Lucy doesn't have hers done either. Okay, so I will put in a photograph and I will open up the one for you kids in Kabul. And that's your homework. I will be putting together a quiz for 1,000 Splendid Suns as well. I just, now that I know where we are in the book, I will pull together a few questions.
And you do 8 and 9.
You did what?
And you do 8. Right,
Well, eight's too late, but you can add words to 9.
I mean,
He
I have
finished
words.
mine, but he didn't finish it.
Oh, I see. You did 9, but you didn't do 8. Okay. You know what you can do? Why don't you move the words you have in 9 to 8, and then you can add words to 9. But then that gives me words I can use. Okay, so hey, Lucy, you didn't put your definitions in for vocab 8. You put words in for vocab 8, but no definition. Okay, so anybody else with questions? You're doing vocab 8 quiz for homework, and I will get that picture in and pick the words ASAP. Okay. Hey.
Again.
Hello, Miss Ellen.
Hello, nice to see you.
Hello. Nice to see you. It's so nice to have you back in class.
Thank you. It's nice to be back in class.
Sure.
Unfortunately, tonight we have an internet problem. I don't know what has happened to the connection. We have very poor connection problem. Marwa also has sent me a private message that she couldn't join the class tonight.
Yeah.
And also I tried many times to join the class. So tonight it was very bad.
Okay.
So I will do my best to join the class.